A sharp wind swept across the high mountain trail as a young boy made his way toward the old frontier town at the bottom of the ridge. His boots were worn, his coat patched in more places than he liked to admit, but his steps carried a quiet determination. Folks in town often said he had the spirit of the mountains in his walk, steady and calm no matter how rough the path became. He grew up on those slopes, gathering firewood, hunting small game, and learning to read the signs of nature long before he learned to read any book. Life had never been soft for him, but he had learned early that the mountains rewarded those who worked hard and stayed honest. He walked alone that morning, carrying with him a few coins he had saved for years, hoping they would be enough for something he had dreamed about since he was little. Winter clouds pressed low over the peaks, and he felt the cold settling deeper into the valley. A sign that the season would be harsher than usual. The old American frontier towns were full of stories, and he had heard most of them while sitting behind the general store stove or helping the blacksmith stack wood. Some stories were about gold, some about misfortune, and some about the strange things found hidden in abandoned places. People around here believed the mountains guarded their own secrets. That morning, he wondered if he was about to walk into one of those tailies when he reached the wooden notice nailed outside the sheriff's office. It had been fluttering in the wind for days, and he had passed it many times, but today he finally stopped and read it again. Deserted cabin for sale, $5. As is, the words were simple, the price unbelievably low. Folks said the cabin was falling apart, perched on a lonely ridge close to the deeper wilderness, a place most folks preferred to stay clear of during winter. But to him, it was a chance to have something of his own, a place where he could build a future instead of drifting from chore to chore. He walked into town with that poster on his mind, imagining a small wooden shelter tucked under tall pines, a place where he could light a fire, store his few belongings, and sleep under a roof that belonged to him. The sheriff raised an eyebrow when the boy placed 5 coins on the counter. "You sure about that old place?" the sheriff asked. "Ain't nobody been up there since last year. Weather tore it bad, and some say animals took over." The boy nodded quietly. He didn't have many chances in life, and this one felt like it had fallen straight from the sky. The sheriff wrote a note on a scrap of paper and pushed it toward him. "There you go. It's yours now. Just be careful. Winter's creeping in fast." Those words echoed in his mind as he left the office and started the long climb back up. The mountain trail the path grew steeper as he went higher. The air turned colder, and he could feel snowflakes brushing against his face even though the storm hadn't fully begun yet. The landscape around him stretched wide and silent, filled with pine trees bending under the weight of early frost. The mountains felt ancient, almost watching him as he made his way up with slow, steady determination. He had always felt a deep connection to the land, like it had shaped him just as much as he had shaped his own survival. Even now, with the sky darkening and winter pressing in, there was something comforting about the familiar slopes and the echo of his boots crunching over frozen earth. He reached the ridge by midday, his breath heavy from the climb. When he finally saw the cabin, he stopped for a moment. It stood crooked beneath a cluster of trees, its roof sagging, its windows clouded with dust and age. It looked tired but not lifeless, almost as if it had been waiting for someone to return. A cold wind swept through the clearing, and he pulled his coat tighter around him before heading toward the door. He noticed claw marks on the wooden frame near the entrance, long scratches that made him pause. Wild animals were common in the mountains, but these marks looked deeper, sharper, and fresher than he expected. For a second, doubt crept into his mind, but he pushed it away. He had come too far to turn around now. He placed his hand on the old door and gave it a slow push. The hinges groaned as if waking from a long sleep. The inside was dark at first, filled with shadows that made the place feel bigger than it was. Dust floated in the cold air, swirling with each breath he took. He stepped inside and scanned the room, noticing the broken table, the collapsed shelf, and the old stone fireplace full of cold ashes. It felt abandoned in every way, yet there was something in the air that didn't match the silence. It was almost like the cabin itself was holding its breath. He took another step, and the wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. That's when he heard it. A low, deep sound, almost like a growl, but softer, vibrating through the air in a way that made the hair on his arms rise. He froze, his heart beating faster as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. Something moved in the far corner. Not fast, just a slow shift of weight, as if a sleeping creature had sensed a presence. The boy stayed still, his breath trapped in his chest. The shadows shifted again, and he could make out the shape of something large, something alive. Then a pair of eyes opened, glowing pale in the cold darkness. Watching him with a steady stillness that felt both powerful and ancient, his body tensed as he realized he wasn't alone in the deserted cabin he had just bought. The creature stepped forward a little, revealing its outline in the faint light coming through the doorway. A thick coat of silver fur shimmered even in the dull glow, and the long tail flicked once across the dusty floor. The boy felt the world narrow around him as recognition struck. It was a snow leopard, rare in these mountains, beautiful and deadly, and it was staring at him with a calm that was far more unsettling than any growl. He didn't move. He didn't even breathe. The snow leopard blinked slowly, its chest rising and falling in deep, quiet breaths. It wasn't attacking, but it wasn't backing away either. It stood as if guarding the cabin, as if the place belonged to it long before he arrived. The cold wind from outside slipped through the doorway, but he barely noticed. All he could focus on was the silent creature and the unspoken tension filling the room. Buying a deserted cabin for $5 had seemed like a dream, but now he stood at the edge of something he could not yet understand. The mountain world had offered him a place, but it had also given him a challenge he was not prepared for. The cabin grew quieter, the air heavier, and the boy felt that strange moment stretch between them. He didn't know if he should run or speak or simply stand still. All he knew was that the snow leopard was watching him with an unreadable gaze. And as the cold deepened around them and the storm clouds gathered outside, he understood that his life on the mountain was about to change in a way he never expected. The boy stood rooted in place. The cold air from the doorway mixing with the warm breath of the snow leopard as their eyes stayed locked. His heartbeat felt louder than the wind outside, louder than the creaking walls, louder than anything he had ever heard in his life. The snow leopard didn't look hungry or angry, but it didn't look friendly either. It was calm in a way that made the moment even more tense, like it was deciding whether the boy was a threat or simply another wandering creature that had stepped into its shelter. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. He had grown up around the mountains and had seen many animals, but nothing like this. Snow leopards were rare, almost like ghosts people whispered about. And now one stood only a few steps away from him inside the abandoned cabin he had bought for $5. He slowly shifted his weight back, but the old floorboard made a cracking sound that echoed through the room. The snow leopard lifted its head higher, its ears twitching, its muscles tightening just a little. The boy froze again. Somewhere deep inside him, instincts built over years of living close to nature told him not to turn his back, not to run, not to make sudden moves. So he stood still, letting the silence stretch between them. The snow leopard blinked once, then twice, as if studying him in return. He wasn't sure if it could sense his fear or if it simply understood he meant no harm, but the creature eventually relaxed enough to lower its head back toward the floor. The boy let out a breath. He didn't realize he had been holding. He carefully stepped back until his shoulder touched the open door. For a moment, he thought about stepping outside into the cold wind, putting distance between him and the mysterious animal. But he also knew that if he left the cabin now, he might never find the courage to step back inside. And as strange as it was, a part of him felt drawn to the moment. The mountains had always given him quiet lessons, but this one felt different, like the land itself had placed him here for a reason he couldn't yet understand. He slowly reached for the latch of the door, not to shut the snow leopard in or keep it out, but simply because the cold wind was turning stronger. The creature turned its pale eyes toward him again, watching every move he made. The boy didn't dare speak. His voice felt trapped somewhere in his chest. He closed the door gently, leaving just enough space for light to slip in through the cracks. The cabin dimmed, but the shape of the snow leopard was still clear, curled in the far corner where an old blanket had fallen into a heap long ago. The creature wasn't just passing through. It had been living here. That thought settled into the boy's mind, and he slowly understood why the price had been so low. The sheriff didn't know all the details, but perhaps some of the townsfolk had guessed something was wrong up here. Maybe someone had seen the claw marks. Maybe someone had spotted tracks in the snow. Maybe nobody wanted to say anything because the mountains had always belonged to their creatures before people tried to claim them. He stepped away from the door and moved closer to the center of the room, careful not to get too close to the snow leopard. He needed to understand what he had walked into. The cabin smelled faintly of old wood, pine needles, and something warm, almost comforting. The blanket under the snow leopard looked old but thick, the kind someone might have left behind during a previous winter. He noticed bones in the corner near the wall, small ones, likely from rabbits or other prey the creature had caught. It had been surviving here for a while. He wondered if the snow leopard had chosen this place because of the storm or if this was already its home long before the cabin became his. A gust of wind rattled the walls, and the snow leopard lifted its head again, listening. The storm was moving in fast, darker clouds covering the sky and dropping the temperature. The boy realized leaving now could put him in danger. Returning to town before nightfall would be nearly impossible in this weather. He would have to stay here, in the same space as the creature that could end his life with a single leap. The thought shook him, but he knew the mountains were unforgiving, and survival often meant accepting the risks that came with them. He slowly walked toward the fireplace and knelt beside it, brushing away old ashes with the sleeve of his coat. He didn't light a fire, not yet. Fire might scare the snow leopard or make it feel cornered. He needed to understand its behavior first. His mind drifted back to his childhood, to the days when he followed his father up the slopes, learning how to track animals and understand their moods. His father always spoke about the silent language of the wilderness, how a creature's eyes, breathing, and posture could reveal more than any spoken word. He tried now to remember those lessons. The snow leopard didn't seem territorial, at least not in the way some predators were. It wasn't pacing or showing its teeth. Instead, its calmness felt almost intentional, like it was waiting to see what kind of person he was. As the wind pressed harder against the cabin, the snow piles outside began forming deeper ridges. The boy stood up and dusted off his hands. He needed to set his sack down, but he didn't want to make noise. He carefully lowered it next to the broken table and removed a small loaf of bread he had saved for the trip. His stomach tightened with hunger, but he didn't take a bite. Instead, he looked toward the snow leopard, wondering if it had eaten recently. The creature didn't look starved, but surviving winter was never easy. Without thinking too much, he placed a small corner of the bread on the floor closer to the middle of the room. It wasn't much, but it was something. He backed away afterward, letting the snow leopard decide whether to accept it or ignore it. Minutes passed, though they felt longer. The snow leopard didn't move at first. Then its tail flicked, slow and cautious. It lifted its head, sniffed the air, and after a long moment it rose to its feet. The boy felt every muscle in his body tense again. The creature walked forward, its steps soft and controlled, barely making a sound on the wooden floor. It didn't look at the boy. Its eyes remained fixed on the bread. It lowered its head and sniffed it once more before gently nipping the piece and carrying it back to its corner. The boy exhaled softly, trying not to show relief too openly. The simple act didn't solve anything, but it created a thin thread of trust, one that might grow stronger or break depending on what happened next. The storm outside turned fierce, snow sweeping across the cabin roof in thick waves. The boy wrapped his arms around himself, shivering from the cold that seeped through the walls. He moved to repair a small gap beside the window using a piece of old cloth he found on the floor. He noticed the snow leopard watching him as he worked, not with hostility, but with curiosity. Every movement he made, every shift of weight, was observed with calm attention. Hours passed, and the light outside faded into early evening. The cabin darkened further, and the chill grew sharper. The boy knew he would have to start a fire now. Without warmth, neither he nor the snow leopard would make it through the night. He gathered small twigs from a box near the fireplace and placed them carefully inside. When he struck the match, he hesitated, glancing at the snow leopard. The creature watched him, but didn't react aggressively. He brought the flame to the kindling, and a soft fire crackled to life. Warmth slowly filled the room. Pushing back the cold, the firelight reflected off the snow leopard's fur, making it look almost unreal, like a creature carved from winter itself. The boy sat near the warmth, exhausted but alert. His thoughts circled questions he had no answers for. Why had the snow leopard chosen this cabin? Had someone left it here? Was it lost, injured, or simply seeking shelter from the storm? And more importantly, what did this encounter mean for his future? He didn't know. All he knew was that nothing about this cabin was simple. The mountains had given him a home that came with a mystery far deeper than he expected. The snow leopard lay curled in the corner, its eyes half open, watching the fire with a steady calm. The boy sat across from it, wrapped in its silent gaze, knowing that the real challenge was only beginning, and as the storm raged outside and the fire crackled inside, he sensed that the night ahead would reveal more than he was ready to face. The fire burned low as night settled fully around the cabin, and the boy felt the weight of the mountains pressing in on all sides. The wind had softened into a steady howl, like a distant voice calling down the slopes. He sat close to the hearth, rubbing his hands together, his eyes drifting from the flames to the snow leopard resting in the shadows. The creature had not moved much since it ate the piece of bread, but its eyes never stayed closed for long. Every sound from outside made its ears twitch. The boy sensed that, like him, the snow leopard was listening for danger that went beyond the storm. There was a strange bond building between them, not made of trust yet, but of shared survival. Both of them had chosen this lonely cabin on the ridge. Both of them were trapped here by winter and fate. As he watched the animal, memories from the past rose in his mind like ghosts. Years ago, before he was old enough to climb the high ridges alone, his father had taken him hunting on the lower slopes. His father always spoke gently about wild animals, even as they tracked deer and rabbits. He used to say that the wilderness had its own rules, and that anyone who ignored them sooner or later paid the price. One day they had seen tracks in the snow unlike anything the boy knew. His father had followed them only for a short distance before pulling him back. He remembered his father's quiet words. These belong to a big cat. Might be one of those snow ghost folks talk about. If we ever cross paths with one, we give it space. It belongs here more than we do. That lesson stayed inside the boy like a carved mark. Now, years later, sitting in a deserted cabin with a snow leopard only a few steps away, he understood what his father had meant in a way he never had before. His father was gone now, taken by a late spring storm when the ice broke loose higher up. The boy had watched the mountains swallow the last person who truly understood him. After that, he had drifted between small jobs around town, carrying wood, tending animals, fixing fences. No family waited for him at night. The mountains became his only home. And his greatest fear was living the rest of his life without ever owning a place that was truly his. That fear had pushed him to place those worn coins on the sheriff's desk. Now that dream sat in front of the fire with him, wrapped in danger, fur, and silent eyes. The snow leopard shifted, lifting its head to sniff the air again. Its gaze moved to the small cracks around the door and window. The boy followed its eyes, listening closely. At first he heard nothing, just the crackle of the fire and the low moan of the wind. Then, faint but clear, he caught another sound, hoofbeats. They were distant but growing closer, muffled by snow yet steady. Someone was riding up the ridge. The boy's chest tightened. Nobody came up here during a storm unless they had a strong reason. He could not help thinking of the sheriff's doubtful look when he bought the cabin and the warning about animals. Maybe word had already spread in town that he had moved in. Maybe someone had decided to come check on him. Or maybe, he thought uneasily, someone else had an interest in this old cabin long before he did. The snow leopard's eyes narrowed, and it rose to its feet, muscles tense, tail flicking slowly behind it. It stepped closer to the wall, placing itself near the darkest corner, alert and ready. The boy watched it and understood that whatever was coming did not just concern him. Whoever rode up this far might not be friendly toward a rare, valuable creature like this. There were always whispers in town about trappers who broke the law, men who cared more about fur and coin than about the land. If one of them had seen tracks or heard rumors of a big cat in the area, they might be on their way now. Following the trail straight to this cabin, the hoofbeats grew louder. Then slowed, then stopped somewhere outside among the trees. The boy's heart pounded. He moved quickly to the fire and kicked a bit of ash over the brightest flames, dimming the light but not putting it out. Soft shadows wrapped the room again. The snow leopard crouched low, ready but silent. The boy stepped closer to the door, every part of him tense. He heard a voice outside, rough and annoyed, followed by another calmer one. 2 riders. Their words carried just enough through the wind for him to catch pieces. Tracks end up here? Told you something was using this place. Maybe that kid the sheriff talked about. Then a pause. Or maybe something worth a lot more than $5. His stomach twisted. They were not here for him. Not really. They were here for whatever wild thing they believed was inside. He glanced at the snow leopard, whose pale eyes glowed in the half-light. It watched him, as if trying to decide whether he was part of the threat or part of the answer. The boy knew he had to make a choice. He could step aside, pretend he had no idea what they were talking about, and let them do what they wanted. That might keep him safe, at least in the eyes of the men outside. Or he could stand in their way and risk angering folks who were older, stronger. An arm. The door shook under a firm knock. The sound snapped through the cabin. The boy flinched, then straightened. If he stayed quiet, they might break the door down. He set his jaw and opened it instead. 2 men stood on the small porch, both wrapped in heavy coats coated with snow. One had a scar across his cheek and sharp eyes that scanned the room without bothering to ask permission. The other had a calmer expression but carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. They smelled of cold, leather, sweat, and long rides. They looked past the boy as if he were nothing more than a shadow. You the one who bought this place? The scarred man asked. The boy nodded, gripping the edge of the door to keep his hands from shaking. $5, the man said with a thin smirk. Cheap price for a cabin on a ridge like this? Almost like someone wanted to get rid of it fast. His eyes moved toward the dark corner where the snow leopard lay. The creature was barely visible, but its presence settled heavily in the room. The boy stepped slightly to the side, trying to block the man's line of sight as much as he could. It was empty when I came, the boy said, forcing his voice to stay steady. Just an old place. I'm fixing it up for winter. The calmer man studied him, saying nothing. The scarred man scratched his jaw, not believing a word. We've been tracking something up these slopes. Big cat from the look of the prints. It's been circling near the logging routes, scaring workers. They pay good money to make sure nothing dangerous prowls near their camps. You see anything unusual up here? The boy felt the weight of the snow leopard's gaze on his back. He thought of the bread he had offered, the way the animal had accepted it and returned to its corner. He thought of his father's words about who truly belonged in the mountains. Just snow and wind, he replied quietly. Maybe some old animal tracks from before the last snowfall. Nothing fresh? The scarred man narrowed his eyes. Mind if we take a look around? He stepped toward the door without waiting for an answer. Panic flashed through the boy. If these men saw the snow leopard, they would not leave without trying to claim it, alive or dead. The animal might fight, and the cabin would become a trap for all of them. In a rush, the boy moved forward, blocking the doorway completely. The storm's bad, he said, forcing the words out. The roof leaks, the floor's weak, and the chimney smokes. You'll find better shelter down the ridge. There's nothing here worth your trouble. The calmer man watched him more closely now, quietly reading the tension in his shoulders and the fear in his voice. The scarred man's jaw tightened. He was not used to being told no by a mountain boy with patched clothes and no real power. He took a step closer, leaning in until his cold breath touched the boy's face. Listen, he said. We know what we're doing. Something valuable is near this ridge. If you're hiding it, that makes you part of the problem. And problems get fixed up here one way or another. His hand drifted toward his belt, where a knife hung in a worn sheath. The boy held his ground but felt his legs tremble. Inside the cabin, the snow leopard rose again, silent as falling snow. It moved closer to the edge of the shadows, eyes glowing more brightly now. It sensed the threat as clearly as the boy did. The tension in the air grew thicker, like the storm clouds pressing down outside. The calmer man finally spoke. "Leave him be for now," he said to his partner. "Storm's getting worse. If we push farther tonight, we might not make it back." He glanced past the boy, and the faintest hint of understanding crossed his face. Maybe he caught the shift of fur in the dark, or maybe he only guessed. "We can ride down to the next ridge and circle back when the weather clears. If there's something here, it's not going anywhere fast." The scarred man hesitated, clearly unhappy, but the rising wind outside reminded him that even hardened men answered to the mountain's moods. "Fine," he muttered. He pointed a gloved finger at the boy. "If you see that cat, you let the logging camp know. They'll pay good money for that information. More than this rotten cabin is worth." With that, the two men turned away from the door and walked back into the swirling snow. The hoofbeats faded slowly into the storm. Leaving the ridge quiet once more, the boy shut the door and leaned against it, his legs close to giving out. The snow leopard stood at the edge of the firelight now, closer than it had ever been. They stared at each other, two lives tangled together by chance and danger. The boy realized that by lying for the animal he had taken a side. He was no longer just a poor kid trying to survive winter in a cheap cabin. He had stepped into a conflict between the wild and the world of men. Between those who saw the mountain as a place to own and cut and sell, and those who felt it as a living thing outside. The storm roared louder, as if reacting to the choice he had made. Inside, the fire glowed low, casting long shadows on the walls. The boy moved back toward the hearth, his mind racing. He would have to think of a way to keep the snow leopard safe and himself alive, while men with rifles and greedy eyes turned their attention to this ridge. And as night deepened and the cold crept closer, he knew that this uneasy peace inside the cabin could not last much longer. The storm lasted deep into the night, rattling the old wooden walls until it felt like the whole cabin was trembling under the weight of winter. The boy sat close to the fire, his heart still unsteady after the visit from the two riders. The snow leopard paced the far end of the room now, no longer curled in the shadows. Its movements were slow and measured, its large paws lifting and settling on the floor with a grace that felt almost unreal. The cabin, once silent and abandoned, now held a strange, living energy. The boy could feel it in the air, in the glow of the fire, in the tension that tied him and the animal together. Outside, the ridge groaned under the rising snow, but inside, the real storm was building between the threats he could see and the ones he did not yet understand. He replayed the rider's words in his mind. They were coming back. Whether in a day or two, whether alone or with more men, they would return to this ridge with their rifles, convinced that there was something valuable hidden here. And there was. The snow leopard was rare, powerful, and mysterious. People in town liked to talk about the wilderness like it was something to conquer, something to fence, cut, or sell. But this animal felt like a symbol of everything the mountains still protected. The boy knew that if the riders returned and found it, the creature would not stand a chance. And neither would he. The snow leopard stopped pacing. It looked at him with those pale, steady eyes, as if it understood something had shifted forever. The boy swallowed and spoke softly, almost whispering. "They'll come for you, and I don't know how to stop them." The creature tilted its head slightly, listening to the tone more than the words. He didn't expect an answer, but somehow the silence between them felt like the beginning of something important. Something that could change the fate of both their lives. By morning, the storm had quieted. Thick snow covered the ridge in smooth layers, burying tracks, branches, and fallen pine needles. The world outside looked untouched, like the start of a new season. But under that peaceful appearance lay danger. The boy stepped out briefly, pulling his coat tight, his breath turning white in the air. He scanned the ridge for horse tracks, but the storm had covered everything. That made him even more uneasy. The riders could be anywhere. They could be waiting lower down the slope or riding toward another trail that circled back to his cabin. The mountains held many paths, and the deeper a man rode into them, the fewer witnesses there were to whatever choices he made. He returned inside and began preparing small plans in his mind. He thought about leading the snow leopard deeper into the forest, to a place where people rarely went. But the creature seemed attached to the cabin, almost protective of it. He wondered whether this had been its shelter long before he arrived. Maybe the cabin wasn't just abandoned. Maybe someone had built it with a purpose, or maybe someone else had left something behind that drew animals close. The anger from the riders, the way they talked about the ridge, hinted at things he didn't yet know. As the day passed, he searched the cabin more carefully. Behind the broken shelf, he found a trap that had rusted over as if it had been left in a hurry. He also found an old coat stuffed under the collapsed cot, covered in claw marks. Those marks looked too old to be the snow leopard's, but they told him that this cabin had a history of conflict between people and animals. It made him wonder if the previous owner had been someone who hunted creatures like the one sitting in the shadows now. Maybe the snow leopard had returned because this place had once been its refuge. Or maybe it stayed out of habit, wounded trust, or the simple instinct to survive. Throughout the day, the tension grew heavier. The boy felt it in his shoulders, in the way he kept glancing at the window. The snow leopard sensed it too. It wandered closer to the door at times, listening for sounds the boy couldn't hear. Sometimes it stood beside him, its fur brushing lightly against his leg, making him freeze in place. Somehow, without planning it, they moved like two beings trying to survive together rather than separately. The boy didn't know how long this uneasy bond would last, but he felt it growing stronger with each passing hour. Just before dusk, he heard something again. Not hoofbeats this time, voices, faint, carried by the wind. 2, maybe 3, coming from the direction of the lower slope, climbing toward him. He felt his stomach twist. They were returning sooner than he feared, and this time they weren't riding alone. The snow leopard's ears shot up, and it moved to the far side of the cabin, crouched low and tense. The boy moved quickly, grabbing his sack and stuffing inside a few things he might need. He didn't know if he could escape with the snow leopard or if the creature even wanted to leave. But staying in the cabin meant being trapped. The voices grew clearer as they climbed. He heard the scarred man's rough tone, barking orders. Then the sound of metal hitting something hard. They were armed. The boy's breath shook as he stepped toward the snow leopard. "We have to go," he whispered. The creature looked at him, breathing slow but deep. It moved toward the door, not pushing him aside, but standing as if waiting. That small gesture felt like a message he could not ignore. The boy grabbed the latch and eased the door open. The cold air rushed in. The world outside was blue with the last light of day. The ridge was quiet, but the voices were close, coming from the woods just beyond the clearing. The boy stepped out, trying to stay low. The snow leopard followed silently, its paws sinking into the fresh snow without a sound. Together, they moved toward the tree line behind the cabin, slipping into the wilderness that stretched endlessly up the mountainside. Branches brushed against the boy's coat as he hurried forward. He knew these woods well. He had hunted, climbed, and slept under the trees here since childhood. But he had never traveled them with a snow leopard walking at his side. The creature stayed close, glancing back occasionally, listening for danger. The boy felt both fear and a strange sense of strength. They were no longer two separate lives. They were a unit now, bound by the danger chasing them. He could still hear the riders. They had reached the cabin. One of them shouted something angry, kicking down the door. The boy flinched, knowing they would search every corner and find the warmth in the fireplace. They would see the tracks leading away and know he had fled. They would follow. Men like that didn't give up when money or pride was involved. And if they caught up to him, he knew they wouldn't simply ask questions. They had seen the fear in his eyes the night before. They would assume he was hiding something valuable. And they would be right. He pushed deeper into the woods, his lungs burning from the cold. The snow leopard moved ahead, guiding him toward a narrow pass between two cliffs. The path looked dangerous, steep, and slick, but the creature stepped confidently. The boy followed, trusting its instincts. The ridge behind them echoed with new voices. More men had joined. They were calling out, spreading across the clearing, searching, hunting. The forest felt alive with the sound of pursuit. As the boy climbed the narrow path, he felt the snow shift beneath his boots. Below him, the drop was sharp and long. One wrong step could send him tumbling. The snow leopard paused above him, waiting patiently. Its calmness gave him strength. Inch by inch, he climbed higher until the ridge leveled slightly, opening into a small hidden clearing surrounded by tall pines. The snow leopard stepped into the center. Looking around as if it knew this place well, the boy followed and collapsed on a fallen log, catching his breath. His hands shook, not only from cold but from fear of what might come next. The snow leopard stood still, watching him, then turned its head toward the forest beyond. The boy listened and heard distant shouts echoing up the ridge. The riders were following their trail. They were climbing, determined, getting closer by the minute. The boy stood again, pushing his fear aside. He knew this mountain better than them. He knew every hidden path, every ridge, every frozen stream. But winter changed the land. Paths collapsed under ice. Branches snapped. Snow muffled everything. And the men behind him didn't care about the cold or the danger. They cared only about finding what they came for. He looked at the snow leopard, its fur glowing faintly under the pale evening light. "They won't stop," he whispered. "Not until they take you, or hurt you, or worse." The creature blinked slowly, its gaze unwavering. It stepped closer to him, and for the first time it pressed its head lightly against his arm. The touch was brief, but enough to send a shiver through him that had nothing to do with cold. It trusted him. Or maybe it simply understood the threat. Either way, they stood together now. And the danger was climbing closer with every heartbeat. The boy looked toward the darkening forest, the mountain rising higher ahead of them. He knew they had one chance left, one path that could keep them ahead of the riders. But that path led to the highest ridge, a place known for sudden storms, thin air, and cliffs hidden under snow. Few people ever climbed it. Even fewer returned. The shouts behind them grew louder. The boy tightened his coat, met the snow leopard's eyes, and stepped toward the dangerous path leading upward. The real fight for survival had just begun. The boy climbed higher along the narrow ridge with the snow leopard close beside him, their breaths rising in white clouds as the cold air thinned around them. The shouts of the riders drifted upward from below, sometimes clear, sometimes fading against the wind. He didn't look back now. Every step forward mattered. The path grew steeper, but he pushed through the fear and exhaustion because the snow leopard stayed steady and calm, guiding him toward a place where the mountain opened into a hidden bowl sheltered by tall cliffs. The sky above shifted from gray to faint blue as the storm cleared, leaving the world quiet and bright. It felt like the mountain was giving them one last chance to reach safety. When they entered the clearing, the boy realized why the snow leopard had chosen this direction. The place felt untouched, peaceful, almost sacred. A thin stream ran through the center, not yet frozen, and the trees around it formed a natural wall. From here, he could see the valley far below, and even the cabin, a small dot against the white landscape. But more importantly, he saw no riders. Their voices were gone. The steep climb had slowed them, maybe even turned them back. The boy let out a shaky breath and dropped to his knees in relief. The snow leopard circled once, then settled beside him, its fur brushing his arm like a quiet reassurance that they had crossed the most dangerous part. As the boy caught his breath, he couldn't help thinking about the strange path that had brought him here. He had started this journey wanting only a place to call home, a cheap cabin on a lonely ridge, $5 for a chance to belong somewhere. He never imagined that buying that cabin would pull him into the heart of a conflict between the wild world and the people who tried to control it. The mountain had given him more than shelter. It had given him a purpose bigger than himself. The snow leopard lifted its head suddenly, listening. The boy held still, worried the riders might have followed after all. But the sound he heard was not voices. It was the distant rumble of snow loosening from upper slopes. The mountain was shifting after the storm. A long slide tumbled down a ridge far from them, sending a white cloud into the air. The riders would hear it too, and they would think twice before pushing farther into dangerous terrain during winter. Slowly, the boy's fear faded. The danger wasn't gone forever, but the mountain had bought them time. As the afternoon softened into early evening, the snow leopard walked toward the stream and drank from it. The boy followed, cupping his hands to gather cold water. His reflection wavered in the surface, framed by snow and sky. He wondered how different he looked now compared to the boy who had walked into town with 5 coins. He felt older somehow, more sure of himself. The mountain had tested him, and instead of breaking, he had kept moving forward. He sat down near the snow leopard, grateful for its steady presence. There had been moments when fear nearly overtook him, when he thought the riders would catch them both. But every time he looked at the animal, something inside him steadied. The snow leopard was fierce, but it was also gentle in a way he hadn't expected. It had not harmed him. Instead, it had watched him, trusted him, and guided him up the ridge as if it understood that their survival depended on each other. As the sky darkened again, the boy realized they couldn't stay hidden forever. Winter would deepen. Food would be harder to find. And the cabin, no matter how old or broken, was still the warmest shelter he had. Going back felt risky, but he knew he couldn't leave that place for good. It was still his home, and maybe the snow leopard understood that too, because when he rose and looked down toward the ridge, the creature walked beside him without hesitation. It wasn't leading now. It was following his choice. Their journey back down the mountain was slow and careful. The snow glittered under the faint starlight, and the wind had calmed into a quiet whisper. The boy stayed alert, watching for signs of the riders, but the forest was still. The storm and the avalanche had scared off even the boldest men. When the cabin finally appeared between the trees, lit faintly by the moonlight, the boy felt a wave of emotion rise in his chest. He never knew a simple wooden structure could mean so much. The cabin door hung slightly crooked from where the riders had kicked it, and the snow outside bore faint footprints from their earlier search. But the place was untouched now, empty, waiting. The boy walked inside, checking every corner, making sure they were alone. The fire had long gone cold, but the room still held the warmth of memory. The snow leopard stepped in behind him and lay down near the fireplace as if slipping back into a familiar nest. That night, the boy fixed the broken door and brought in fresh wood for a new fire. As flames grew, filling the room with light, he felt the fear and tension of the previous days lift slowly from his shoulders. The snow leopard watched him with calm eyes, its breathing steady. For the first time since the riders appeared, the boy felt that maybe things could change for the better. Maybe the cabin didn't need to be a place of conflict. Maybe it could become something new. A place where wild and human could exist together without fear. Over the next days, the boy worked to strengthen the cabin. He patched the roof, reinforced the walls, and cleared the surrounding brush so he could spot trouble early. The snow leopard often lay nearby, watching him like a quiet guardian. Sometimes it disappeared into the woods, returning with leaves stuck in its fur or snow dusting its back. Each time it returned to the cabin. The boy realized the creature had chosen this place. Word eventually reached the valley that the riders never returned from their search. Some folks said they got scared off by the avalanche. Others whispered that the ridge was cursed or protected by something they didn't understand. No one wanted to climb up there again during winter, and the boy let those rumors spread without correcting a thing. The mountain had its own way of keeping secrets, and people tended to leave alone what they feared. As more days passed, the boy's bond with the snow leopard deepened in small ways. He learned how it moved when it sensed danger and how it breathed when the world was calm. He learned that it liked to sit near the window at night, watching the stars, and that it rested beside the fire on cold mornings. He began calling it the mountain ghost in his mind, a name that felt both strong and gentle. The snow leopard did not seem bothered by his presence. It walked close to him but never acted like an animal trapped or controlled. It stayed because it wanted to stay, and that meant everything to the boy. When spring finally touched the ridge, the first sunlit patches appeared near the cabin. Snow melted in slow streams along the path. The cold loosened its grip, and the forest began waking with soft sounds. One morning, the snow leopard stood at the doorway, looking out toward the mountain peaks. The boy sensed what was coming before it moved. The creature stepped forward, pausing just long enough to look back at him. Its pale eyes held something quiet and meaningful. Then it walked into the trees, disappearing between the branches with the same grace it had shown the first time he saw it. The boy didn't follow. He knew that the snow leopard was returning to its true home, the deep wilderness where it belonged. And he felt no sadness, only gratitude. The mountains had brought them together for a reason, and now they had given each other what they needed. The boy had found courage he didn't know he had. The snow leopard had found safety when the storm was at its worst. Their paths had crossed, and that connection would stay with him forever. As the sun rose over the ridge, warming the cabin's roof, the boy stepped outside and took a long breath of the crisp spring air. He looked over the land he now called home, the same cabin he once bought for $5. It wasn't much in the eyes of the world, but to him, it was the place where he learned what it meant to protect something bigger than himself. It was where he discovered loyalty, bravery, and the silent bond between humans and the wild. He walked back inside, ready to build a new life with the lessons the mountain had carved into his heart. And as he sat near the fire, he knew that somewhere out there in the high peaks, the mountain ghost watched over him still, guarding the ridge and the quiet peace they had fought so hard to keep. The story of the mountain boy and the snow leopard would one day become a tale whispered in the valley, a reminder that the wilderness holds secrets worth protecting and that even the smallest person can stand against danger when the heart leads with courage. And in the quiet glow of morning, the boy felt something warm and steady rise inside him. It was hope.